Hey folks, Joe Rogan here. Today we're diving into some wild shit. We're talking about Raymond Patriarca. This guy was a real-life Tony Soprano before Tony Soprano was even a thing. He ran the New England Mafia like a boss for decades. Patriarca wasn't just any mobster. He was the big cheese, the top dog. From the 1950s to the 1980s, this guy had his fingers in every criminal pie you can imagine. Gambling, loan sharking, extortion, you name it, he was probably involved. And he did it all while keeping a low profile. But here's the thing, Patriarca wasn't born into this life. He had to claw his way to the top. And that's exactly what Patriarca did in the criminal underworld. So buckle up, because we're about to take a deep dive into the life of one of America's most notorious mobsters. Let's rewind the clock a bit. Raymond Patriarca was born on March 18, 1908 in Worcester, Massachusetts. Patriarca grew up in a tough neighborhood, the kind of place where you had to watch your back. Patriarca's criminal career started early. We're talking teenage years here. He wasn't out playing baseball or chasing girls. Well, maybe he was doing that too. But he was also getting into some serious trouble. Petty theft, breaking and entering, that kind of stuff. In 1938, Patriarca got involved in a murder. He was charged with being an accessory to murder. But get this, the charges were dropped. Why? Well, rumor has it that he had some connections in high places. This is when people started to realize that this Patriarca kid wasn't just some small-time crook. He had potential. But the real turning point came when Patriarca hooked up with the Mafia. He started doing jobs for them, proving himself. It's like an intern trying to impress the boss, except instead of getting coffee, he was probably breaking kneecaps. All right, so Patriarca's in the mob now. But he's not content with being just another soldier. This guy had ambition. He wanted to be the one calling the shots. Patriarca started making moves. He was smart, ruthless, and most importantly, he knew how to make money. In the mob, money talks. If you can bring in the cash, you get respect. And Patriarca, he was like a human ATM for the Mafia. He had his hands in all sorts of rackets. Gambling, loan sharking, you name it. By the early 1950s, Patriarca had become the underboss of the New England family. That's like being the vice president of the Mafia. And in 1954, he got it. The previous boss, Philip Brucola, stepped down and Patriarca took over. Patriarca had reached the pinnacle of the criminal underworld. So now Patriarca's the boss. But being the boss isn't just about having a fancy title. It's about expanding your territory, increasing your profits and crushing your competition. One of the first things he did was move the family's base of operations from Boston to Providence, Rhode Island. Now, you might be thinking, Joe, why the hell would he do that? Well, it was a smart move. Providence was smaller, easier to control. Plus, the cops there were more, let's say, cooperative. From Providence, Patriarca started expanding his empire. He didn't just stick to the traditional mob rackets. He got into legitimate businesses too. Construction companies, vending machine operations, you name it. He formed alliances with other crime families. He had connections with the New York families, the Chicago outfit, even some international groups. It's like he was creating a criminal United Nations. And at the center of it all, Raymond Patriarca, pulling the strings like a puppet master. This guy wasn't just running a crime family anymore. He was building an empire. Section 5. Running the show, key operations and activities. Now, let's talk about the nitty-gritty of Patriarca's operations. This wasn't just some small-time racket. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise here. And at the center of it all was gambling. Patriarca controlled most of the illegal gambling in New England. Sports betting, numbers games, underground casinos. If there was money to be made from people's gambling habits, Patriarca had his fingers in it. But gambling was just the tip of the iceberg. Loan sharking was another big earner for Patriarca's outfit. Patriarca was also big into labor racketeering. He had his hooks in several unions, especially in the construction industry. This gave him a lot of power and a steady stream of income. But here's the thing that really set Patriarca apart. He was always looking for new opportunities. When vending machines started becoming popular, he got into that business, always adapting, always evolving. Section 6. Challenges and conflicts, navigating the underworld. Now, you might be thinking, Joe, this all sounds too easy. Surely Patriarca faced some challenges, right? And you'd be absolutely right. Running a criminal empire isn't all sunshine and rainbows. One of the biggest challenges Patriarca faced was keeping his own people in line. See, in the mob world, loyalty isn't always guaranteed. You've got ambitious underlings who want to move up, rival factions looking to take over. There were several attempts to challenge Patriarca's authority over the years. In the early 1960s, some of his own men tried to muscle in on his territory. But Patriarca, he dealt with these challenges swiftly and brutally. He'd crush any opposition before it could gain traction. But internal conflicts weren't the only problems Patriarca had to deal with. There was also the constant threat from law enforcement. The FBI had been trying to take down Patriarca for years. Patriarca had to be constantly on guard, always one step ahead. It's the kind of pressure that would break most people. Section 7. Law enforcement strikes back. The heat intensifies. All right, so Patriarca's been running things for a while now. He's at the top of his game. But here's the thing about being on top. Everyone wants to knock you down. And in Patriarca's case, it wasn't just rival gangsters he had to worry about. The law was coming for him, and they were coming hard. In the late 1960s, the heat really started to turn up. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had made taking down organized crime a top priority. And Patriarca? He was right at the top of their hit list. The feds started using new tactics, wiretaps, surveillance, informants. They threw everything they had at Patriarca. They were chipping away at his defenses, bit by bit. In 1970, they finally got their big break. Patriarca was indicted on murder charges. Now, this wasn't his first run-in with the law, but this time was different. Patriarca was on the ropes, and everyone knew it. Section 8. The fall of a kingpin, Patriarca's decline. So Patriarca's facing murder charges. This is serious shit. We're not talking about some minor gambling rap here. This is the kind of charge that can put you away for life. The trial was a media circus. Everyone wanted to see the great Raymond Patriarca brought low. And fall he did. In 1970, Patriarca was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, 10 years might not sound like much for a murder rap, but for a guy like Patriarca, it was devastating. He was still alive, but his power, that was slipping away. The once mighty Patriarca empire was starting to crumble. Even from behind bars, Patriarca tried to keep control of his empire. Section 9, Behind Bars, the final chapter. So Patriarca's in the slammer. But don't think for a second that he just rolled over and gave up. Even from behind bars, he was trying to keep his empire together. He had visitors, made phone calls, sent messages through his lawyers. Anything to keep his finger on the pulse of his organization. But here's the thing. The criminal world doesn't stand still. While Patriarca was locked up, things were changing on the outside. New players were moving in, old alliances were breaking down. Patriarca's health started to fail him too. Years of stress and the high-pressure lifestyle of a mob boss had taken their toll. He had heart problems, other health issues. In 1984, Patriarca was released from prison. But he wasn't the same man who went in. He was older, weaker, and his grip on power had loosened. The world had moved on, and Patriarca was struggling to keep up. Section 10. Legacy of a Crime Lord, Patriarca's Lasting Impact. All right, let's wrap this up. Raymond Patriarca died on July 11th, 1984, just a few months after getting out of prison. Heart attack. But even though Patriarca was gone, his impact on the New England underworld lasted for years. The organization Patriarca built didn't just disappear overnight, it continued on, although it was never as strong or as unified as it was under his leadership. Patriarca's legacy extends beyond just the criminal world, though. He became a part of New England folklore. Books were written about him, documentaries were made. He's like the Al Capone of New England. Even people who never met him, never lived through his reign, they know the name Raymond Patriarca. But here's the thing, Patriarca's story isn't just about one man, it's about an era. Patriarca was one of the last of the old-school mob bosses. And that, folks, is the legacy of Raymond Patriarca, a reminder of a darker, wilder time in American history.